Chapter 3.
"Are you sure that your group will be able to handle the beast?" the city lord asked, not hiding the concern in his voice. Cloak rolled his eyes, though he only allowed himself the action because his face was concealed, as it always was. "We wouldn't accept the job if we weren't confident," Dice said with a grin. As the leader, it was his job to deal with the constant doubt that came from the guild's employers, but Dice's team wasn't like most of the others, with their questionable results and a reputation for fleeing without completing a job. Dice's team was the second most renowned monster hunting guild in the entire realm of Ruin, and despite the unfavorable reputation of those generally in the profession, Dice's team always got results. In the handful of years Cloak had spent in the guild, they hadn't failed a single mission. Of course, that didn't always convince the city lords of small towns like Limestall, and Cloak had to admit with some reluctance that this particular city lord had more reason to worry than most. Not only was the monster he needed defeated dangerously close to the town, but the last mercenary group had ended up disappearing, likely taking too many casualties to motivate the remaining hunters to stay. Dice continued the conversation. "We can take care of the monster, though as I previously mentioned, we will have to negotiate the price afterward. We can't know how much it'll cost to fight an unknown monster, after all." The city lord paled a bit, but nodded. Of course. Once you have slain the beast, we can discuss your prices. I hate to seem distrustful, as I know that your team would never betray our contract, but I'm afraid it cannot be helped." Dice just shrugged. "As you said, it can't be helped, so no worries. I'd hate to put your town in any more peril than it is already in." The city lord nodded. "Well then, I'll leave you to your task. Captain, if you would show these two men to where the monster was last seen, that would be wonderful. I believe I have another meeting after this, introducing myself to some newcomers to the village, making sure they understand their new roles." The city lord waved his hand in a dismissive manner, and the captain nodded to them, walking to the door. The captain had a nervous manner about him as he led Cloak and Dice to the exit. That was understandable. The guards of this town had a very specific set of objectives. First and foremost was to keep peace in the town, but second was to patrol for any monsters that may threaten the town. Lastly, if a monster ever was to attack the small area, their job would be to hold it off while the other villagers evacuated. Such common soldiers weren't trained to deal with fighting monsters. If they were, most of them would join a hunting guild instead of guarding a town in the middle of nowhere. For the captain, his entire life rested on whether Dice, Cloak, and the rest of the mercenary team would be able to stop whatever monster was coming. Once, Cloak might have felt anxious about having so much responsibility on his shoulders. Now, however, all he felt was confidence. As the doors to the manor opened, Cloak noticed with surprise that there was already a group of people outside. Must be the newcomers, Cloak thought. It was always interesting to see how different people reacted to being condemned to the realm of ruin. He looked over them all, analyzing them quickly. Besides the two soldiers who guided the group, there were three others. One man in the group, with graying hair and a large girth, was already wearing a mask. Such weakness, Cloak thought immediately, then regretted it. He'd never felt vexation at mask wearers before Dice had shared his negative opinion on them, and the philosophies warned against letting your perspective be influenced by someone else's. Cloak cleared his mind, then scanned the other two. One was a youthful man who couldn't have reached adulthood quite yet, with wild hair and a dangerous spark in his eyes. Cloak found himself wondering what such a young man had done to get himself banished already. The last member was a young woman, who looked to be a few years younger than Cloak was. He met her eyes as they walked past one another, and was shocked by how stunning she looked. Her brown hair flowed loosely behind her head, which complemented her piercing brown eyes. Her features were pretty, but not in an over-the-top way, and though she obviously took care of herself, she didn't seem to put the same care into it that Frost or many other women did, giving off an air of confidence that, "Ruination, I'm doing it again," Cloak thought with annoyance as he realized he had been staring after her, even after they'd passed each other. At least his mask would have hidden how obviously his eyes had followed her. He shook his head to clear it and pointedly looked straight ahead. Blazing brain, unable to keep focused when needed. Unfortunately, there wasn't much Cloak could do at the moment. If his brain wanted to focus on such foolish things, then Cloak would just have to deal with it for now. "Cloak," Dice called out. "You okay, kid?" Cloak shook his head. "Yeah, sorry about that. Are we almost there? How long was I thinking about that blasted stranger?" The captain nodded. This is the edge of the town. Reports say that the monster, whatever it is making its lair somewhere over the next hill or two. If you want to track it down, that is where I would start. Dice nodded. Thank you, Captain. That's all the service will need for now. Cloak, go grab Frost and Clip. One of the man's customary grins split his face. We've got an adventure ahead of us today.
Yevyen was surprised to see that the city lord, sitting on a humble throne made of polished stone blocks, seemed deeply troubled. Most leaders Yevyen had known took extreme care to not let their nervousness show in front of their subjects. This strongly built man, who seemed to be around 50, made no effort to hide his nervousness, though he did seem to shove it down as he addressed the group of newcomers. "I'm glad to see that you have all made it safely," the city lord said with a smile. Yevyen still didn't know the man's name and found himself wondering if the man had traded it in exchange for his title. That was a tradition that had started on Yevyen's home planet, though the practice had died out decades before Yevyen had been born. The city lord continued speaking. "As I'm sure you have already been informed, we in Limestall are a strong community of people. We help each other and give support whenever needed. If this lifestyle is one that you are incapable of following, then it might be best if you leave this town now and find another area to live in. However, if you think that you can adapt and find happiness here, then we welcome you to stay for as long as you add to our community. I see that one among you has already taken up a mask," the city lord continued, referring to Wilbur. The man had put on a mask almost immediately after they had been delivered, along with 2 pairs of shoes and 4 sets of clothing. Yevyen had tried on each of his clothing items to find that they had all fit him perfectly. He'd also received a mask, with a note telling him that he could customize it if he wanted. He'd spent the morning working with a specific type of paint that the mask seemed to absorb and had made a pattern that he liked. Yevyen still didn't plan on wearing the mask, but it had been something to do. The conversation soon turned dull, with the city lord talking about all the types of openings that the town had. Wilbur announced that he'd planned on applying for the bakery, since the note he had been left told him that he had skills in that area. Apparently, it was customary for someone who took up a mask to leave their new self a letter, sometimes explaining their past, other times why they had decided to wear the mind-wiping masks. Wilbur's letter had apparently told him about his old self's aptitude for cooking. Yevyen listened to the conversation with half an ear. He really wasn't sure what he wanted to do in the town. He had never had a true job. He'd spent most of his time learning politics, finances, and how to build business relations. Little of it relevant now. As he half listened to the conversation, Yevyen found his eyes wandering the manor. The audience room was well made, with marble flooring and dark red carpet-like walls. There were paintings hung around the hallway and a few statues that drew Yevyen's attention. The statues were easily twice the size of a normal person and would be perfect for a person to hide behind while waiting to strike. If the city lord had a man behind each statue with short bows or knives, then Yevyen, Wilbur, and Nyla could be dead in a matter of seconds. He knew it was unrealistic to assume that someone would assassinate 3 new arrivals, especially when they could have had the soldiers execute them when they'd first appeared on the planet. Unarmed and confused, the small squad of soldiers that had welcomed them would have been more than enough to finish them off instead. But Yevyen couldn't help staring at the shadows, watching them, and waiting for one of them to move, to give itself away. A good leader should always be alert, always watching while others relax, for that is the time an opponent will try to strike. The advice of a man now dead, killed in a moment of inattentiveness. Yevyen ignored the shiver that forced itself down his back whenever he thought of the event. He tried to force his mind back into the lecture of the city lord, but soon found his mind wandering again. Who could have imagined that, on his second day in literal ruination, Yevyen would find himself in a similar position to the one he had spent the majority of his childhood in? Maybe another man would have welcomed the familiarity, but Yevyen craved something new, something adventurous. Might have to leave this town soon, he thought idly to himself, especially if they plan on making me into a farmer or something. There's got to be an adventure out here, and I won't let anything stop me from finding it.